Welcome back to Environmental Ethics. I'm Tom, and today we are discussing Aristotle's virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is the third main ethical theory that we will discuss. And Aristotle's writing, this is a selection from Nicomachean Ethics, and Aristotle's writing in ancient Greece about 400 BC. But virtue ethics is a major theory that many theorists are still using in the 20th century and 21st century, and is definitely a significant departure from utilitarianism and deontology as we've been discussing it. As an overview, the way I like to characterize virtue ethics is that it views ethics as a matter of being a good person, right? And I like to focus on three components of that, which is the being, the good, and a person, right? So we'll start with the last one first. For Aristotle and virtue ethics in general, it characterizes ethics as a matter of being a good person in particular, not necessarily doing the right thing. Virtue ethics is what you call an agent-centered ethical theory. This contrasts with an act-centered ethical theory. Deontology and consequentialism are both act-centered views. That means that what they think they're evaluating in moral valuation are actions, right? So the question is whether or not you are doing the right thing. The greatest happiness principle and categorical imperative are both designed to tell us what the right thing to do is. For Aristotle, he's concerned with being a good person, right? So what we are evaluating are people or character. And so Aristotle's much more concerned with developing good moral character and being a good person that obviously will do the right thing, but not necessarily, right? A good person can make mistakes. The second component is the idea of being a good person. So for Aristotle, as we'll see in a couple minutes here, he views ethics as a practical affair, right? So ethics is really a matter of developing skills, abilities, habits, and doing all the things to develop that moral character so that you are in fact a good person, right? So for Aristotle, it's not good enough to know what a good person is or what a good person would do. It is more a matter of actually being a good person yourself, right? And so he really treats the study of ethics as the study of the development of moral character. And then the last component is about being a good person, right? And so Aristotle's view is teleological. Teleology is the study of the purpose or aim of a thing, and this is a very broad concept. And in ancient philosophy, this applies to many things. For instance, artifacts, human-made things, usually are made with some purpose in mind. So a table is for putting things on, a chair is for sitting, a car is for driving, so on and so forth. But also natural objects can have a purpose or an aim. For example, an animal has a way of being that is specific to it, right? So what's good for a fish might not be good for a cat, it might not be good for a tree, so on and so forth, right? Each of these things has a particular kind of nature to it, and there are certain things that fulfill that nature. This will actually be important for many other conversations that we'll have later on in the semester. Also, actions can have an telos or an aim, right? So if I'm meandering around in front of campus, you can ask me what I'm doing, and I might give you various different answers based on what the aim or purpose of that activity is. Maybe I'm pacing because I'm thinking, maybe I'm walking to my car because I'm going home, maybe I'm trying to find my class or something like this. Our various movements have some kind of aim or purpose to them. And then finally, out of the living things, there's one particular living thing that Aristotle is very concerned with when it comes to ethics, and that is human beings. Human beings have an aim or purpose, and that aim or purpose he characterizes as eudaimonia, Eudaimonia is a Greek term that is oftentimes translated as happiness, but it does not correspond exactly to our kind of contemporary sense of happiness. Eudaimonia is not just a passive sense of pleasure. It is more of a sense of joy or accomplishment we get from doing something, right? From more or less doing things that we should be doing. So I like to think about it in terms of the satisfaction of achievement, the kind of good feeling that comes with graduating or being a good parent or helping someone or getting a promotion, something like this. It's also sometimes translated as human flourishing. So it's more of a sense of well-being and a sense that for Aristotle, doing the right thing, being a good person should feel good. Really, eudaimonia is the sense of human flourishing that one gets when they achieve what you'd call human excellence, right? And this brings us back to virtue ethics. The reason why it's called virtue ethics is because it views ethics as a matter of achieving human excellence or developing moral character, being a good person. And virtues are markers of human excellence. So getting into the more specifics of Aristotle's view, in Book 2 we see kind of two major claims, and I will take them in turn. The first one is that being ethical is a matter of practice, right? It's a practical matter, and it's a matter of habit and development, right? And so one major sticking point here is that you can ask yourself, when it comes to a skill, how do you develop a skill, right? So how do you learn how to ride a bike? Well, you can study about bikes quite a bit. You can watch people ride bikes, but really you're never going to acquire that skill until you get on the bike and try, right? How do you learn how to play guitar? Well, you have to sit down with a guitar and start playing, right? How do you learn how to play piano or write or anything like that? You have to practice that skill. The way in which you develop a skill is by using that skill, employing that skill, right? And so for Aristotle, he thinks that being ethical or having good moral character is exercising a skill. And so he thinks that we kind of develop that ethical sensibility by trying to be a good person, right? Trying to do the right thing will put us in a place where we actually get good at it. This contrasts quite a bit with the other theories that we've looked at, because in the other theories, the view is that you need to know what the right thing to do is before you can do the right thing. And Aristotle disagrees. He thinks it's like a skill where you have to just practice and develop that skill over time, right? And because of this, he views things like developing habits, hanging out with the right sort of people, things like moral education as really fundamental to understanding morality in general. So he has this very robust developmental and kind of holistic view of what it is to develop moral character, and is much less theoretical in its orientation. The second claim is that being ethical is a matter of finding a mean between extremes. And this is a very famous piece of Aristotle's view, where it's sometimes called the golden mean. And so for Aristotle, he thinks that a mean is a balance between extremes of excess and deficiency. And he thinks this mean is kind of what characterizes virtues in particular, and shows that they occupy this kind of spot of being a mean. And so one way to think about this is to recognize that many different admirable qualities cease to be virtues or admirable qualities if we have too much of them. So even things like, for example, courage, right? Too little courage is cowardice. But too much courage is actually foolishness, right? You should have a little bit of fear. You should have a little bit of a sense of what you're doing and the dangers it presents, right? So the example is, a warrior that goes into battle by himself against an army of 1,000 is not courageous. He's foolish, right? Same thing with, for example, honesty, right? If you have too little, of course, that's dishonesty. That's not good. But having too much honesty actually turns into brutal honesty. You don't always have to say everything that you think is true. That can be a fault. Same thing with things like anger, right? Definitely too much anger is a problem, but too little can be a problem as well. And as it turns out, that Aristotle thinks that such a mean, this kind of balance, is important for not just virtues, but also for things like emotional dispositions. So, as I mentioned, anger, but also sadness, right? Too little sadness is being too detached. Too much is a problem, right? That kind of turns into something like depression. And so he thinks anger, sadness, happiness, excitement, all these kinds of things require a balance, right? And so this kind of brings us to the overall picture that Aristotle has when he talks about developing moral character. One thing that we get from Aristotle, or we don't get from Aristotle, is a bright red line, right? We don't get a categorical imperative. We don't get a greatest happiness principle. There's no one thing that's going to tell us exactly what a good person looks like. It's more fluid than that. However, it's not merely subjective. The way to think about Aristotle's view and this idea of human flourishing, I think, is analogous to health. So if you think about being healthy is not something that is super static. It is a very holistic idea, right? In order to be healthy, a person has to eat right, sleep right, not have too much stress, exercise, and all of these things in this kind of mean or balanced state, right? Too much exercise is not good, too little is not good, too much sleep is not good, too little is not good, and you have to kind of do all of these things at the same time in order to be a healthy person. And, what is healthy for one person might not necessarily be healthy for another, but nonetheless, there is a clear objective sense when someone is healthy or ill, right? And even though we don't have exact standards for exactly what makes a person healthy, we do have a pretty good sense. And the same thing for Aristotle when it comes to moral character, right? It's not a clear, exact standard, but we have a pretty good, range that tells us when a person is a good person or when a person is a bad person, right? And it is something that you have to continuously do. It's not something that you just become a good person and then you're done for the rest of your life. You have to continue to do it and perpetuate and maintain that state of having good character. That's Aristotle in a nutshell. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.